Welcome to the Global Gratitude Summit. I'm Luann Saraga-Walters.
And I'm Sharon Saraga-Walters.
And today we're actually going to explain what we keep saying is the link between gratitude, our thinking, our visualizing, our thought process, our emotions, and how that actually contributes to our health and our wellness. And our guest today is the perfect guy for this because he has a passion for being a clinician educator. He loves to work with patients, and he's also devoted to helping his patients and students understand the behind the scenes things that affect their health, the whys and the hows. So that's why, of course, we thought we've got to have this gentleman on. Dr. Christopher Browne holds multiple degrees, a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology, a Bachelor of Science in Human Biology, a Master's of Science in Human Nutrition and Functional Medicine, and he's a Doctor of Chiropractic. Wow. He's taught physical medicine, orthopedics, and clinical nutrition to doctoral students and has supervised interns delivering patient care. He's the Associate Director of the Human Nutrition and Functional Medicine Master Program at the University of Western States in Portland, Oregon. And we're so pleased that he's joined us today for the summit. So welcome, Dr. Browne.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, and it's wonderful to be here with you both.
Well, we're really kind of putting you in the hot seat because you're kind of our go-to guru science guy who's going to do a lot of the explaining for us. But, you know, you do it so well. And I will tell our viewers and our listeners that I had the pleasure of experiencing Dr. Browne's teaching techniques because I was a student in that Master of Science program at University of Western States, Human Nutrition and Functional Medicine. And it's a powerful program, and it's really changed my life. So I want to thank you for that as well. Wonderful.
Well, thank you so much. I can't imagine at this point doing something other than what I do because it is such a pleasure to share this information that can transform lives, that can help facilitate health with really the brightest set of students in that part of the field. So it's really just a joy to work there.
All right. Well, we are, in this summit, as we talked about prior to today, we're exploring how gratitude impacts our overall wellness. And we're really taking a look at the physical, the mental, the spiritual, the emotional, and what that looks like. So we're going to have Sharon start us off with our first question.
Yeah, so how does gratitude impact both the mind and our actual brain health, mental and physical?
Absolutely. So this is a fantastic question. And if we start by looking at the mind, we see that gratitude is such a major player in our experience of a joyful life. In a subjective way, it provides us with this felt evidence that our lives are worthwhile and good in this fundamental way. And that is so important psychologically because it is a counterbalance to the fact that our mammal brains have evolved to be exceptionally good at scanning for danger in our environment. So much so that even as we have evolved and we have these intellectual superpowers, we tend to use them to project into the future about possible trouble we could experience, or go into the past and go over our mistakes to see how we can avoid difficult, painful circumstances, danger circumstances in the future. And so gratitude helps us to ground us in the moment. Instead of casting our awareness into the past and into the future all the time, it brings us here where we are in a way that reaffirms the goodness of our existence. And that's really a crucial aspect of our inner life.
It's a significant area because we develop that way naturally. And what you're saying is it developed with all of these aspects at the same time. It's not like it's a separate thing. It's an interwoven part of our evolutionary process.
Exactly. It's really one of our recovery mechanisms, one of our inner recuperative powers is to experience this feeling of wholeness in our being that is joyful and is grateful for the experience that we're having. And so that's something that can either be what we would call psychologically a state. It can be an experience we're having that's time limited based on a specific circumstance, or it can be a trait, which is a tendency, a personality characteristic that means we will tend to think and feel in that way more and more often. So as you can imagine, it's beneficial to experience the state, but it's even more desirable to cultivate the trait. And so that's going to just increase the likelihood that we'll be able to access our capacity for gratitude, even when the circumstances aren't the easiest. And so I think one of the goals in our practice or our way of living is to grow that capacity and help to shift from these individual experiences to growing that trait.
So, I have to follow up with that, because I don't think that people necessarily realize that we have the ability. I know, well, let me speak for myself. I did not realize that we had the ability to cultivate a trait. I thought of a trait as something that was a part of my natural being, I guess, not, but it wasn't until I learned a little bit more about, I suppose it would be psychology, that I had the capacity to intentionally focus on certain things. And by that focus, I would enhance the ability to create a habit out of it, or that, and that though that habit was actually a physiological process within my brain. So my mind's activity created a physical response within my brain. Am I saying that in an understandable way?
It's absolutely correct. And I love that the focus of that statement began with the word intentional, because it is so much about where we place our awareness, where we choose to focus, and how we choose to repeat behaviors and experiences that will ultimately result in developing these traits. And one of the kind of axioms in neuropsychology is that neurons that fire together wire together. And so the more that we experience repeatedly these states that we would like to ingrain as traits, as habits of our personality, then the more neurologically we rewire some of those connections to facilitate it. So it is absolutely true, and it reflects how flexible, how neuroplastic our brains really are. And this idea of neuroplasticity really underlies a lot of the developments in our understanding of how personality traits can change.
Okay, so that's you've given us quite a bit to. I'm frantically taking notes here as well. I like that statement: neurons that fire together wire together. And then when you talk about neuroplasticity, so can you go into both of those a little bit more in depth from the standpoint of, I guess, tying the mental activity and the physiological? What does that look like when you say neurons that fire together wire together? Is that paving a path? Is that, I mean, what is that doing actually within our brains that would help us generate psychological responses? I don't know if I'm asking, but I'm just going to throw this stuff at you, Dr. Browne, because I don't know if I'm even asking
Absolutely.
correctly. So
No, that is a wonderfully framed question, and it's definitely, as you say, it is paving a path. Sometimes it's referred to as working a groove into our into our neurology. But there are a lot of great metaphors like that, and what is happening physiologically during that process is that our neurons send off these little spiky projections called axons, and they can regrow them, they can branch out in different directions to make contact with various neurons in their vicinity. And so each of those individual nerve cells, depending on what it's exposed to, is going to reinforce the repeated exposure pathways. And so if we, for instance, have a gratitude practice that centers on, let's say we're at a sort of a more beginner or early intermediate stage in a practice, and we're trying to bring gratitude to something that's just mildly annoying in our everyday lives, and we're doing this practice of gratitude around maybe the sound of a coworker's radio in the office next to ours. And so as we practice this cultivating of gratitude, this feeling, the subjective experience that we have paired with that stimulus, this sound that we have previously interpreted negatively, the more that pairing happens, the more that the perception of that stimulus is going to also trigger the neural apparatus for gratitude. So it's about linking parts of our brain in response to stimuli or exposures that we would like to have? What connections would we like to facilitate? What kinds of experiences do we want to have more of? And our brain is wired to pick up on that repetition and increase the association, the connection of neurons that go with those two experiences or those two domains.
I've been just taking all this in because I don't think like this, but one thought is, does the brain or the neurons or the other things that you talk about, does it create memories when we do this practice of gratitude? Are there memories that stay within to help us further the practice that we're doing?
Yes, that is definitely the case. And there are actually some interesting studies that look at gratitude not on the basis of something that's happening in the lab, but based on asking the participants to reflect on memories that inspire that feeling for them. And as we build up those experiences, it's absolutely helpful and real to reflect on those and allow them to reignite this aspect of a feeling of gratitude that we can then carry forward into our present interactions or bring into the moment where we're living.
So you're getting kind of now into an area that I really had wanted to talk about with you, and that is psychoneuroimmunology. That is a fascinating new field. Well, not necessarily new, but I think maybe being discovered a little bit more. Let's talk about that. What is it? How does it impact our health? And what actually is the process that happens? I'm going to turn it over to you because I just asked you a bunch.
Absolutely. So first, I think it's helpful to unpack the word because it's big. So psychoneuroimmunology is three major parts. It's the psyche, it's our nervous system, and it's our immune system. And this is really, I think, a reflection of progress in our ability to use science to understand the interconnected wholeness of who we are as beings. And so one thing that it means is that the thoughts and the feelings that we experience are linked in this dance of electrical and chemical signaling patterns within our nervous system. So these signals are not only about how we think and feel, but they also affect all of our other body systems, including our immune system. So this idea that our thoughts aren't just trapped in this subjective world where only our feelings are affected, it's much more interconnected and body focused than that. And so we're pretty familiar, I think, generally with the fact that we have thoughts and feelings, with the fact that we have a brain, a neurological apparatus that helps to support our consciousness. But I think that the immune system is something that's a little less intuitive for a lot of us to understand. What is it? What does it do? What is it for? And so the immune system has two main jobs. It helps defend us against potentially harmful invaders from the outside, and it also helps to facilitate repairs to damaged tissue on the inside. And one of the major tools that our body uses for both of those jobs is inflammation. And so inflammation can help us contain and neutralize infections, can help start repair processes we need to live, both these little everyday repairs as well as for larger injuries. And so we need essentially a little inflammation to be healthy, but a lot can be a real problem unless there's a big emergency to attend to. So that really brings to us a recognition that modern humans face a very inflammatory set of factors in their lives, internal and external. So we have this fast-paced life that so many of us are dealing with. You have so many stimuli to attend to, and then we have exposures in our air, our water, our food that can also increase inflammation. So we have all these places from the outside that inflammatory signals are coming from, and then also from the inside. What is our sense of our place in the world, our self-worth? How are our coping strategies developed? All of that can pose an inflammation challenge. So that is essentially a recognition that our thoughts and our feelings have all of these effects that play out in our bodies, and we're taking in inputs from our environment that feed into that whole network. So that gets us to a point where we recognize that psychological and emotional stress can make us more inflamed. And that goes in reverse as well, because someone who is inflamed for other reasons is going to be more likely to be stressed or unhappy. And so that the benefit of knowing that is that it gives us so many inputs to be more healthy and more happy by finding all of these different ways that we might be exposed to inflammatory triggers, and then find ways to calm that down. Because our immune system is always looking for what's an excuse to generate some inflammation. We want to find, make a list, and remove those excuses for inflammation so that it doesn't need to happen excessively. And that is, I think, a lot of what our investigations of psychoneuroimmunology help us to understand, that if we really take a comprehensive view of what keeps us healthy and well, we're going to be essentially checking the boxes of what prevents us from becoming overinflamed.
And I think that's actually a very big point for somebody who is trying to look at gratitude as a means to help alleviate anxiety or depression or things that are going on in their lives, when that environment could be actually resulting from, like you're saying, their environment, what they're eating, how they're sleeping, where they are. They could be a number of things. So in those cases, even if we practice that, if we have an active gratitude practice, it still may be causing all of those chemicals to be floating through the body.
Exactly. And so this is why, especially coming from what I would call a functional medicine kind of perspective, what we so often seek to do is to identify all of the barriers to someone manifesting their full potential, their optimal health. And so that's going to include these chemical kinds of exposures, as well as our internal landscape, our thoughts and our feelings. And what we want to do is create an environment where we have the resources inwardly and outwardly to generate and manifest gratitude. So it's great to also begin a gratitude practice as we have these other things going on, but we may really need to remove barriers that are neurochemical in nature before we can proceed or progress in the way that we would like to.
Reap the full benefits, basically. I think that's interesting because that brings us into our next realm, which is even more mysterious. And I'm going to turn it over to Sharon to ask the leading question.
So, Dr. Browne, we're hearing about this gut-brain axis. What is that?
Absolutely. So this is fundamentally a signaling network that was relatively recently discovered and interacts profoundly with both our brain and our digestive apparatus. So when we think about the nervous system, it has three main parts as we currently understand it. We have the central nervous system, our brain and spinal cord. We have the peripheral nervous system, which connects our brain and spinal cord with the tissues of our body. And we also have the enteric nervous system, which is a little bit like a second brain. It's not just conduits that tell tissues what to do with messages from the brain. It generates some of its own messages and tells the brain what to do sometimes as well. So we have this bidirectional network of communication where the gut and brain are in a conversation. Whereas with almost all of our other tissues, the brain is mostly giving orders rather than taking them as much.
So enteric nervous system, this is in the gut?
Exactly. This is a network of nervous tissue that surrounds our gut wall. And that is something that was for years assumed to be just about local housekeeping, just about keeping the contractions of the gut smooth muscle running and synchronized across parts. But we now recognize that there is this far-reaching set of connections that arises from the neural apparatus in our gut.
Well, if anybody has ever had any kind of fluttering when they've not been comfortable getting up to speak in front of a large group of people, I think maybe they've experienced the enteric nervous system in action, when you're like, oh, I don't feel so good. For people who aren't comfortable speaking or they get nervous with that might be an active result of it. But how does that, where is this axis? Are you saying that it's thoughts to gut or gut to brain to gut, gut to brain? Is it a one directional? Is it a bidirectional? And if it's bidirectional, how do we know that?
Mm-hmm. Great questions. And so it is bidirectional, and part of that is in recognition of the fact that certain changes in gut signaling will result in changes in patterns of brain activation and brain signaling molecules. So we can see gut talking to brain that way. And for longer than that, we've observed brain talking to gut. The primary conduit for that is the vagus nerve. And this is a way to control things like gut motility, but it also changes gut sensation. And so both our sensory and our motor components of control go mostly from brain to gut. And then we have these additional, often either stress-related or even emotionally related communications that go in both directions, from brain to gut and from gut to brain.
Wow, that's fascinating.
It is, I think,
How
really
do you have emotions in your gut? Wait. I'm trying to wrap my head around this, or my gut. I don't know which one. How do I have emotions in my? Are you saying that when you said that caught my attention? So you can have emotions coming from your gut to your brain?
We can say that there are signals and chemicals generated in the gut that influence our emotional states. And so ultimately they will be perceived in the brain, or they will be received in the brain before they are perceived as emotions. But the impetus, the beginning, the starting point can be from the gut. And so one of the, I think, kind of shocking developments regarding this was the recognition that about 90% of the serotonin that our body creates is synthesized in the gut, in the enteric nervous system primarily. And so that set of activities is something that we now have linked with especially depressive states, and a lot of it has to do with our gut microbes, because if they are signaling with us in ways that support calm immune system functioning, then we're going to be able to synthesize and utilize serotonin. If they are more aggressive, combative species, or if they're acting more aggressively, these microbes, then that's going to divert resources and make us less able to take advantage of this reservoir of calming neurotransmitters that our gut can provide for us.
So what is gratitude? The impact does gratitude have on the gut-brain axis?
Well, it's something that I think really gives us a lot of control, a lot of influence over our health outcomes and our sense of personal well-being. So first of all, the more that we work to cultivate a set of patterns in our nervous system, in our thoughts and feelings, because we know those two are inextricably linked, they're completely interrelated. So when we are in that mode, when we are cultivating those patterns, then we are ensuring that our signaling to the gut is keeping things running well. And part of running well is maintaining tight connections between the cells in our gut lining that prevents things like bacteria or fragments of bacteria or fragments of food that are not yet fully digested and broken down from passing into our bloodstream and angering our immune system, making us think that there's an invader. So we have this ability to keep the structure as well as the function of our gut healthy and robust by maintaining this calm, non-alarm general tone. And it's certainly natural that sometimes the alarm system is activated. It's much more about, are we able to process that activation and stress and bring things down towards a calmer baseline? So that is going to directly provide signaling to our gut that lets it know that everything's okay, that we can proceed with the normal functions of that organ instead of having to be all fight or flight, all defend against attackers in our function there.
So it's interesting because just in the past 30 minutes, you've talked about gratitude's effect on our actual brain by developing these neural pathways that really allow us to see the same stimulus from a different perspective, which works in the opposite way too. If we're constantly angered at something, then we're going to have that constant stimulus and we're going to associate it, right? But if we practice that intentional gratitude, like you're talking about, we're rerouting that. So we're taking the gratitude highway, right, in our brains instead of playing a role in this area that we don't want to be. Bad health. It helps our immune system by calming things down and helping work towards decreasing inflammation. And if we're in a state of inflammation, then it can help us get a handle on it where we can get to the point of maybe addressing whatever's causing that inflammation outside of a stressful, and it helps the gut with controlling the gut bacteria. That's an amazing, I love him. You're amazing. You've explained that in such a substantial way. And yet I think everybody who's listening is going to be able to really get it. I love the way you speak. And, you know, your degrees, your experience really lend you the ability to see things from that mind, body, spirit, right, aspect, because you've got the psychology, the biology, with the physiology, the human nutrition and the functional medicine, the chiropractic care, and all of the things that go with it. Let me ask you about nutrition a little bit, since that's actually our connection here, and how we can, I know you've said before that we can actually eat for or eat with gratitude, and how that can also affect our health. How does eating have anything to do with gratitude other than saying, I'm thankful for this apple?
Mm-hmm. So that is not only a wonderful question, but I appreciate that you've identified both for and with gratitude, because they are in some ways different dimensions of how our relationship with food can include gratitude. So that first raises the point that there are so many dimensions just to our relationship with food already. We have the social environment where food is shared. We have this cultural component that might inform our food choices or what we might prefer. We have the sensory experiences that come along with preparing and eating food. And then we have pardon me, this incredibly powerful set of physiological and biochemical interactions of the food within our body. And so it's crucial, first of all, when we're talking about eating for gratitude, that we hold those different dimensions of that relationship in balance, rather than trying to emphasize one at the expense of all the others, because that's typically not going to be as sustainable. If we neglect the sensory enjoyment of food, trying to make it all healthy no matter what, then we are typically not going to be able to stick with that. Plus, it's possible to eat an incredibly healthy diet that we love to eat. So I don't think that we should settle for less. And that's something that I think is important to state at the outset. So
an occasional potato chip is okay.
Exactly. That is definitely true. And when we're coming from a place of well-being, of being sort of well supported in these different areas of our life, we find that it's okay to have a few potato chips. We don't need that to be our sense of joy for the day. It's just one enjoyable thing, and and that can work into our pattern of enjoyable and also health promoting food. So definitely the case. We do not have to be perfectionists. We don't have to be focused on never-ending escalating strictness. This should really be, I think, ultimately an intuitive way to eat, rather than having to micromanage each and every single meal's decision. It can feel like that at the beginning while we're setting up new patterns, but ultimately when we get this up and running, it should feel like a very natural and intuitive extension of our behavior.
I already have gratitude for that. So no.
Exactly. It becomes self-sustaining.
I love that. And I love the, that how it's kind of like our thinking, but the thoughts and the words that we have around food as we're eating it as well can be really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Is that true?
Exactly. It's definitely the case. And so, and that comes, I think, to the idea of eating with gratitude. This idea of bringing our awareness to the process of preparing and eating our food is incredibly powerful. And this is kind of a recurring theme in pretty much all of the mind-body interventions that I'm most familiar with, is that what we do with our awareness profoundly impacts the experience that we're going to have, as well as the physiological and health-related outcomes that we'll experience. And so when we learn ways to pay attention, mindfulness practice is just a bunch of different ways to get us to grow the muscle of paying attention. And doing that with our food is going to naturally make us able to appreciate all of the wonderful things about that food. And so it's helpful for us to choose wonderful food and then pay attention to our process of preparing and eating it. And so those choices are really about feeding our mind, our experience, as well as our body and our microbiome, because we're feeding them at the same time that we feed us. So feeding our gut bacteria is fortunately pretty easy because we all do well, our microbes and the host, when we eat food that is minimally processed. This can be called a whole food approach to eating, and it oftentimes is described as eating around the perimeter of the grocery store rather than the aisles. I love the description as well of eating only things that your great-great-grandparents would recognize as food. I feel like I might be lifting that from Michael Pollan, but it's just such a fantastically true statement that we can trust foods that are minimally tinkered with. And certainly there are some forms of processing that are okay, but we want minimal rather than maximal processing approaches. And that's going to give us the building blocks, not just for fueling our bodies, but again, for sending signals to our microbes and to our brain that get us the results that we want.
I just want to highlight something you just said too about eating. We're not just eating for ourselves. We're also feeding the microbiome.
Mm-hmm.
So we have, our codependents, our co-living, our roommates, basically, that are here, and we're sharing our food with them. But keeping in mind the numbers of things that those good gut bacteria do, then that is something to really, multiple phases of gratitude here. Being grateful to be able to feed them because we're grateful for the effect that they have in lifting that sense of self. And I didn't know until this conversation about their effect on our emotions, that our brain can interpret certain signals from our guts, from those little guys being very busy, sending up different molecules and triggering different things, and that our brain actually interprets that as emotion. And we want the good ones. We want to feel good. I mean, that's part of overall wellness and well-being. So there are multiple things when you think about how interacted everything is. And, thank you for walking us through that, because that's incredibly impactful. Wow. Well, we have one last question for you. And I know that we've been talking about it a lot, but go ahead.
So Dr. Browne, in summarizing what we've been talking about, what does gratitude mean to you?
I would say that gratitude is, for me, the spontaneous joy of existence. It is something that we can make about a specific situation or about a specific set of conditions. But one of the things that I think is wonderful about gratitude is that it doesn't have to be tied to any condition, any achievement. We can be grateful for the fact that we are here living and breathing, and not just intellectually, but again, I know I beat the drum of mindfulness practice because I think it's so good at getting us to a point where the simple act of sitting quietly and feeling our breath can be a tremendously powerful, joyous experience of gratitude. And so for me, I think that it is so helpful just to recognize that gratitude can always be there, regardless of the other circumstances that we might be experiencing. We can always access it as we learn to cultivate it.
That's beautiful.
That's great.
So, Dr. Browne, you have offered a lot of evidence-based research in this, and I know that there will be some of our listeners who are kind of like me and they get really geeked out by the studies. And so we will, just to let them know, we will have these studies listed in the credits of this video. And if you're listening to it, then be sure to look at today's summit page, and you can find those listed there as well. But wow, you have been just incredibly informative. You're such a good speaker, and you take these complex thoughts and you break them down into truly understandable bite-sized chunks that help people learn. So it's no wonder that you have a passion for being both a clinician and an educator. You're really, really good at it. And thank you so much for sharing your skill with us today in the Global Gratitude Summit. We appreciate having you here.
Yes, thank you so much. I mean, it's like you're telling a story and things that I've never heard of. And I was just going with your story. It was so mesmerizing and interesting. It's lots to think about now. Thank you so much for what you do.
Well, thank you. That is enormously kind. It has been an absolute pleasure to speak with you both, and to all of you who are watching. I hope that this goes out into the world, and I love the event that you have put together around this crucial theme in our lives. So thank you for doing this.
All right. We'll see you later, everybody.